Here we go, my friend. We have our new setup. We are back in the flow of things. We're going to iron out some kinks here and there, but ultimately, who really gives a shit? You know what I mean? As
100%.
long as we're back in the flesh and we're having our conversations,
We
that's all that
stepped up
matters, bro. I've
audio. I
missed you.
got this crazy little device with a bunch of knobby things on it and lots of colorful lights.
Yes, that you don't understand 90% of, I assume.
Not at all. Yeah, I got a thing called an
As long
SD
as you know
card.
where the record
and I-
button is, that's all we need, you know?
I'm literally the least tech savvy human being when it comes to audio visual shit.
Which is ironic because every nature of every part of every business that you manage and run is completely tech driven.
Huge.
So it's
Huge believer in better people at better things.
yeah, and nothing more interesting than the fact of the copyright that we always talk about. You know what I mean? That you literally handle the copyright for every single one of our companies and actually diagnose dyslexic. So it's
100%.
it's a testament to how you've learned to utilize your tools. You know,
Facts.
it's absolutely incredible.
Facts. But here we go. Another week.
Yes, sir. Another week, we're back in it. We appreciate the patience of us getting back to this, but I'm really excited to kick things back off and stay in the flow. You know, season 2 is here. We had our little audio test episode a couple weeks ago, but now we finally figured out how to do this across the world, which I think is important to acknowledge to people.
100%.
You are literally in Germany right now. I'm in Los Angeles, and it's great that we were able to actually come together and make this happen.
Where it all started. It's where it all started.
It's where it actually is where it all started, you know, over our little broken up Wi-Fi signals and whatnot. But we're here. And speaking up broken signals, you know, the world is in a very interesting and turbulent political climate right now. There is, you know, markets are tanking because of the belief of trade wars. And, you know, you had Trump's press secretary announced that they're probably going to announce some type of mediation between the tariffs that have been announced because Trump is he's a businessman. At the end of it, the core of who he is, before he's a politician, he's a businessman. And he understands the basis of leverage and negotiation better than most people will ever understand conceptually. So he understands that there is going to be some short-term hurt for long-term gain, and he is trying to strengthen domestic product and reignite the US dollar globally. And there's always the back and forth banter between politicians of who's going to secede, who's going to step back, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. But he knows the position of power that the United States rightfully holds in the world, with influence, with dominance, with military prowess, whatever it might be that, you know, validates their reasoning. But ultimately, Trump has come in, and in the first month and a half of presidency, has flipped the script from top to bottom. We'll get into the conversation of what people think about Doge and what Elon is doing there. But with the initial conversation, these tariffs that he's implemented, the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, is strictly a bully play. He knows that ultimately they're going to have to buckle, especially with Canada and the hundreds of billions of dollars and the fact that 70 some odd, close to 80% of their imports for domestic product and goods is between the United States. So the economy is entirely based on this trade basis. The one that I am slightly fearful of, just because of the progression that they've made on their own front and in their own right, is China. Because China is definitely a big dog in the yard with the military progress they've made, what they're doing with AI, how they're revolutionizing stuff. They just announced their new high-speed train that they're implementing again to redo everything that they already have, which is the fastest in the world. And you don't fuck around with China. So there's going to have to be some type of common ground that's found there, especially when Xi has come out and said that they're willing to fight the United States to any degree, to any capacity, to any ends. And it's interesting. So the sentiment that you hear, right, like not being in America continuously, what is the world saying? What is the narrative of what are people saying of what's going on in America right now? What's the consensus?
I think that there's a real issue right now with what we spoke about last episode of, you know, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. and this sort of notion of the year of the narrative as opposed to the reality. And I think that's the predicament we're in. It doesn't matter what country you're in right now. If you are on the left, you see what the left wants you to see, and if you're on the right, you see what the right wants you to see. And there is a couple of really powerful websites that I recommend a lot of people go to, and I think we'll do another post about this because I think it's worth digging in deeper on it. But Patrick Bet-David created a website that uses AI to basically align sentiment of each article and allow you to see what other things those particular journalists have written about and where their biases are, so you can understand where they're coming from and what donations they may have received from certain people. And just to get clarity, because I think that's really where we're in right now, is a bit of this information war. You know, you speak to one person and Trump is the worst human being on the earth. Scum of the earth, piece of shit, death to that man. On some people's perspectives, and then other people think he's the most profound genius known to humankind. And I think he's and people think he's the saving grace. So I think that there's a disconnect, not by location, but by your belief system and the algorithm that's formed around you. And I think that's the way the world is seeing this piece of news. If you're in Germany, if you're in Afghanistan, if you're in Australia, and you have a propensity to nod your head when Donald Trump speaks, I know what algorithm you're getting. If you shake your head when Donald Trump speaks, I know what algorithm you're getting. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway and piece of advice for this turbulent time, is this is a rabbit hole you can find yourself going very deep into, and potentially not find your way out. And I think that that's something that I worry about for a lot of people who get caught up in conspiracy theories and all of this this smoke and mirrors that's happening in the world right now. At the end of the day, we have a market crash. If you look at it over the last 12 months, everything's still up. We're all good. Yeah. It's okay.
When in doubt, zoom out.
It's okay. You know, and I think we're just living in such a microcosm, and I think it's taking control of people's consciousness in a way that is impacting how they interact with friends, family, and colleagues. And that's where I get worried, is when the overall tension sits very high and the frequency that we're all operating at is one of disgust, hatred, frustration, anger.
Absolutely.
That's a dangerous place to be. So I think I didn't answer your question. I made the question for myself.
You did.
To answer. But I think that's where I'm coming from on this. You know, I think that there's some things Doja's done that I violently disagree with, and I disagree with a man who stands for free speech to start to cloud that belief system. I'm finding that a little bit difficult to get behind. But I think that there's good and bad of all sides, you know.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that is pretentious to the state of world that we live in right now. And when you're talking about like the frequency being where it's at, and recognizing division amongst family members and friends and whatnot, I had the blessing of meeting up with one of my childhood friends a couple weeks ago. And literally one of my closest friends from the time I was like 7 or 8 years old, haven't seen him in close to 20 years now, you know? And him and I had the luxury of meeting back up, and we were talking about conversations, catching up on all things life. And he was telling me how he recently got married. I was laying praise on that, yada, 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 making some jokes of like, don't do it, get out while you can, yada, 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 or whatever. But he was telling me that they had an awesome and prosperous wedding. And I was asking him, because his dad was an important figure in my life when I was younger. You know, he always used to take us out to these games, showed me a great time, was incredibly generous and loving with just accommodating his childhood friend. So I was asking him about his father and how he's doing. And he's like, I don't speak to my dad anymore. And he actually wasn't even at the wedding. And it took me back a little bit. And I was like, why? Like, what happened? And he's like, oh, like, my partner doesn't like the fact that he voted for Trump. And it was one of those instances where I really realized how a majority of the world views these things and really takes it like inherently to heart. And I'm not that type of person where if someone that I love or someone that I care for happens to have a certain political doctrine or belief system, it's going to sway me away from understanding the measure of who they are, right, as a person outside of all this Babylon bullshit, to put it quite frankly, you know? So it was an interesting moment for me because it's the first time I've felt that in such a personal regard, right? Because I don't allow that division to come into my own life. So there was another instance when I was recently on business in Miami, and we were sitting down at the table with a few different gentlemen having a conversation about stuff. And one of the guys started bringing up a conversation, and his partner immediately shushed him, was like we're not doing political conversation at the table, because it's become such a divide. And he was worried about what ramifications that was going to have in the development of our business conversations, you know? And like you said something, and you just touched on something that I think is a spectacular point, and I think needs to be an omnipresent narrative that we continuously reiterate. We are living in algorithm-based times, period. Whether it's what is being fed to you for you to shop with, when your microphone picks up the fact that you're talking about you're going on vacation in a couple months, and suddenly you start seeing perfectly tailored and curated bathing suits for where you're going. You start seeing destinations and activities on your feed. Whether it's what your algorithm feeds you based off of your likes and your engagements to keep you engaged on the platform, right? Whether it's your news or your political information that's coming to you. And I think that is the most important thing to understand, is you nailed it by saying you could let yourself go and get lost in a rabbit hole that you don't get out of, because it will only continue to feed into those beliefs. And if you think about the prowess of how foreign influence comes into play, like we can touch back on the fact of the 2016 election with what Meta had to face through Congress, and the Russian influence that was believed to have happened across Facebook and posts, and the political propaganda that they were feeding to people, and essentially tie that into today's time, right? I saw a post the other day that mentioned that if a foreign entity really did want to do damage, 100,000 verified Twitter accounts would cost government $10 million, which is nothing. It's chump change if they really did want to shake up the status quo and make shit turbulent and really bring something to fruition, right? So it's like, I think we constantly have to be aware of the markers that are the outliers of this situation, of the fact of what's being fed to you and what it is, and like feed yourself constructive thoughts. Search for engaging and constructive content, because the political narrative never goes away and it never changes, right? So it's like we need to focus on what is actually going to be constructive to us as people. Like focus on health-based topics, focus on hobbies and things that are engaging to you. You have the world at your fingertips and an unlimited knowledge basis at your fingertips. So like feed yourself good things in that regard. You know, that's what I think everybody has to understand, because it's always going to go up and down. It's always going to be turbulent. Left versus right will never go away, you know?
Facts. And I think something that you touched on then that I think, you know, could I think be positioned and branded a little cleaner is, you know, you have a nutrition diet, and I think people need to start thinking about a content diet. They need to think about what they are digesting. You know, when you put all of that...
Dan in the fucking bars,
when
man.
you put all of that stuff inside of you, you know, you have to digest it and you have to process it the same way you have to process food. And junk food is harder to process. It's heavier. It's more difficult for you to comprehend. It leaks out in how people perceive you. It leaks out in how, you know, your overall brand is crafted. And I think, you know, I'm just becoming a big proponent for taking control back on your algorithm and really considering your content diet the same way you do your food diet and your nutrition diet. And you got to make that shit's balanced, you know? And I think, you know, everything's fine in moderation. All the same principles apply to nutrition as it does to content. And I think, you know, when you're going and you're listening to that podcast that only supports one side of the fence, go and find the podcast that podcast hates. Listen to that too. see if there's a different perspective that you may have missed, and really start to consider what you're being brainwashed with. Because when you start to do that, you start to realize that the truth almost always lies in the middle. And I think I really learnt that recently with this Ukraine situation. I think I was so blinded by what Russia had done that I misunderstood what some of the things that were promised, not in this term, but in 2008, 2009, 2010, that have been grating on other countries, you know? And I think there's always more to the story. And you've just got to have a full picture, a round picture. If you're going to have an opinion, have a full one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to interject on a point right there, because I think it's very important. There is always more to the story. So the war that's occurring between Ukraine and Russia, you know, to anybody that's really aware of the global political sphere and climate, it's a proxy war, right, between China and Russia and the United States and NATO. So it's like they can't concede in this manner, because if China, who has their eyes and their sights set on Taiwan, right? Like if they realize that the United States concedes military support to Ukraine, Taiwan's going to be a clean sweep. Like the United States is not going to be able to intervene and offer military support or financial aid or whatever it is that they do to Taiwan in the attempted occupation by China. And that will wholeheartedly shift the political climate and global hierarchy of dominance, right? So it's like we're in a very, very interesting and sensitive time right now, because I think for the first time in centuries, you are realizing that the United States has lost its totalitarian grip on the geopolitical sphere of the world. So we have to see how these things develop. And I think ultimately, you know, the world has been through world wars. It has been through many wars. It has been through many market turbulence, and greener pastures always prevail. The sun always comes up tomorrow. So to take away from this segment, you nailed it on the head of focus on your content diet more than anything, and keep yourself engaged in productive activity and a prosperous train of thought, you know? And touching on prosperous train of thought right now and trying to stay optimistic, how's your crypto portfolio looking these days?
I think that's a question better asked to you. But I think there's one last thing.
That's really what I was
One last thing
for.
I want to touch on with China that I think is very, very important. And I think, you know, I'm an Australian living in Germany, and it's a very interesting juxtaposition to be in, because, you know, one of the things that I think has been very, very much addressed here, and you can see it in what happened with Tesla sales and everything here, is, you know, I think there's some misusage of some symbolism that Germany is very disgusted by, that has been leveraged and used by someone like Elon Musk and now other leaders from around the world that may not have been as close as Germans were to what that really means. And I think there's been some interesting cultural stuff happening in that scenario. And that's been a big wake-up call to me of like realizing that, you know, it's very difficult to understand how other people feel unless you've dealt with their cultural compounds. Like you look at a country like Russia, and I look at Russia and go, they just have such low expectations of happiness. And that's how they operate the way they operate. That's how they can lose in certain wars 20% of their population and not even blink, you know, like that. So, and then you look at a country like Australia, and right now you've got 3 warships hanging off the coast that are literally traveling around Australia, Chinese warships that are traveling around Australia, and they have gone and taken fighter jets, and they have dropped flags in front of our fighter jets as they're flying, which could result in some pretty dangerous stuff taking place. 16 people on board that, and dropping, like, there's and then coming out and saying anyone that messes with us, we will go to the full extent of forces to be able to maintain that. And they're literally just going around the coast, just circling Australia, and literally.
Really? Wow, I wasn't even aware
And they're
of
doing,
this.
and I think that's because that's what I mean by like. I think my point isn't being articulated correctly, but I think since I left home, and I've lived in a lot of other countries, and I've experienced and speak to people on a regular basis about how they're feeling. Everyone's experience is isolated to their cultural norms. And Australia has always had a very turbulent relationship with China because it's so close. We're the closest Western country to them. And there's been times where China's said, Australia's gum on my shoe. We can dispose of it whenever we want. You know, there's like a lot of feelings around Australia being their first target post-Taiwan. And I think there's a bit of a tension around that. And I think right now there is nowhere where you exist where there is not an external force potentially coming for you. That is weird.
Yeah.
We haven't really
Yeah.
felt that energy since World War II.
Yeah, in almost 100
You know,
years.
and-
At this point, 80 something.
And that
years.
is just, I think that's the last point I wanted to make on this scenario of like, I think if you're sitting in America right now and you're worried about Donald Trump or you're happy about Donald Trump, just understand that there is a wake that America leaves behind. America poking a bear may not come back and affect America straight away, but someone might just go, who's friends with America? I'll just see what happens if Sydney doesn't exist anymore. What are you going to do about it? You know, like I think there's just a global tension right now. And I think America has a giant responsibility to take back the reins of control. And I think we're just in a very interesting time. It feels like we're 3 weeks away from knowing what the circumstances of the new world order, so to speak, is going to look like. And I think it's the most unique time I've been alive, it feels.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think you absolutely nailed it. It's scary times, you know. It's scary times to think and hear that the belief around locals and the narrative that you might be aware of that I wouldn't. Again, because of controlled narrative and algorithms. Like, I had no idea that was going on in Australia. Yeah. And to think that Australia would be a trade chip that they would go after Taiwan, I mean, you are now talking about the basis of a world war.
That's, to be clear, that's not being said. It's just a very interesting decision to start doing battle formations in Australian waters. And to fly fighter jets close to our fighter jets that are just patrolling and then getting annoyed when we say, why did you do that? You know, like they're not acts of kindness. That feels like a warning to me, you know, and it's just,
fair assessment.
And I think that's the my biggest thing. I always talk about it all the time, especially in the music industry. I always say to American artists, think the world's bigger than America. Trust me. Like, if you want to break your music, maybe you're better off doing it elsewhere. You know, you're competing in a red ocean. I always encourage people to explore because I do think the rest of the world has a lot to offer. And I think that, you know, the way people are brought up and the way countries are formed, I'm fascinated by. I'm fascinated by the cultural diversity that produced Australia. I'm fascinated by the cultural diversity that produced New Zealand. I'm fascinated by, you know, how Germans are and how passionate they are about their country, but how suppressed they also feel because passion for their country led to the Second World War in a lot of cases. You know, patriotism is a tough thing for Germans to feel. And that's such an interesting insight. Like, it's like, and they're things that we pull into business circumstances and things like that of how to navigate these waters. And I just think that, you know, we are a globe, not a country. And again, zoom out, you know?
Yeah,
and I think there's so much value to be had by comprehending and understanding the nuances of global scenarios, not just which tax state is better for you in the United States.
No, 100%. And I think to correlate back to a point, and the final thing we can touch on here with this at the beginning of what you said with this segment is when you're talking about certain things that were done by certain individuals in regards to symbolism and whatnot, I assume that you're referring to Elon Musk's "My heart goes out to you" like Hail Hitler interpretation, right? And it doesn't help when someone who's regarded as having unprecedented, untethered power right now, feeds into that narrative and in a comical regard. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast a couple days ago, and he knew what he was doing. He played into it by saying, Joe Rogan was like, "What was your thoughts on that?" And he was like, "I did not see it coming." You know what I mean? Trying to riff off of the Nazi word, and like. It's just like when you have the people who are responsible for these actions feeding into it in that narrative, and then you have figures in pop culture like Kanye West, who, God be with the guy, but is running around wearing swastika t-shirts and spending $7 or $8 million to run an ad during the Super Bowl to direct people to it. And then at the same time, you have 100,000 plus orders of that shirt that goes through. It shows you that not everybody's brain or train of thought is all sunshine and rainbows in the way that you may believe that it is, So it's very interesting, and we're seeing the reflection of these times in global markets, like heavily. Like the S&P 500 in the United States has wiped out all post-election gains when it made that crazy rally because people are just uncertain of the ground that we stand on. The crypto markets are going through crazy pullback, but the number one rule to take away from this all, and I will say it 1,000 times an episode, is when in doubt, zoom out. Because the headlines are now Bitcoin has crashed from 100K to 87, 88K, right? When 6 months ago, you and I were having the discussions on one of our episodes where I was like, I'm not going to be the person that tells you to buy Bitcoin at 70,000, 75,000. You know what I'm saying? So it's always in an always up and to the right metric. And what I always say is take this how you will, but always be greedy when others are fearful, especially when it comes to investments. And if you believe in something and you believe in an asset class like crypto, like a lot of my close contemporaries and my peers around me have asked me of my situation in this. And I'm like, listen, as educated and knowledgeable as I am and experienced in the space, I'm actually not the guy to ask. You should go have this conversation with a newbie in the space who's on par with you. Because when you're talking to someone who bought into the market in a very low double-digit range for me with Bitcoin, or for Solana for me that was purchased in the $6 to $8 range, what the fuck do I care if it goes from $260 to $170?
100%. It could halve and you're still fine.
Doesn't mean shit. It wouldn't mean shit, Like I'm still in that position. So it's like I want people to educate themselves and understand what your entry and exit points are that are beneficial to you in your life. That is a very important message for me to deliver today to people. Like, educate yourself. Always do your own research and recognize, okay, if you want to buy into Bitcoin at 100K, so be it. But you better have the patience and the willpower to hang on to that shit until it goes to 250,000. The inevitable, Don't come to me when it crumbles 15, 20%, when over the course of time from the moment that Bitcoin launched, it's up 100,000%. You know what I'm trying to say?
Facts.
So it's like that's the only thing that I really have to say about it is like we've touched on it so many times and everybody knows my conviction and belief in it. So there's no reason to reiterate it continuously. But have faith in what you invest in. And if you do your own proper research and you educate yourself on the regard, you won't feel shaky about it. Just educate yourself and recognize the space. Like, this is part of the game. I have I'm a part of a private group that helps educate people in the space and onboard them into it to teach them the ways of it. And it's just like some things that are often, hilarious to me just because of the lack of experience is like people just continuously think it just always goes up forever,
Yeah.
every single day. And like even if it has a 3 to 5% pullback, like the fear and FUD that starts to develop in these conversations is absolutely insane, dude.
Oh,
Absolutely
I can
insane.
imagine, and I think that's one of the things that is, it's only relevant until it's them. Like they're
Yeah.
not tracking the last 18,000 drawdowns, 4% to 20%. They're not tracking any of that. Their journey started at the moment they put their first dollar in, and that was when
Yeah.
they started their journey of tracking. And the difficulty now is you've just got to have such a long time horizon on it. It has to almost become a lifestyle, because
Yeah,
if it
absolutely.
becomes a quick win, and I think that's just also where we are at in an algorithmic landscape again, is you only hear the bear and you only hear the bottom out and the top out of the storyline. The middle part, when it's sitting there idle at 100K for a while, no one's talking then. No one cares then. That's not part of the storyline. And I think that's
Yeah.
what I'm fascinated by. But I also think that there's another point in amongst all of this in terms of an investment structure that's very, very important. I think we're sitting in a period of time where buying a house is almost feeling relatively impossible for a lot of people. And I think the other side is the cost of money just keeps going down. And you now have a president that is very, very bullish on ensuring economic success for the elite. You've got two choices to make. You can decide that you are not one of them, and you can whinge and moan and hope that your semi-stable job is in place. Or you can change your life. And you can start acting, moving, walking, talking like the elite. At the end of the day, there is nothing stopping you from investing into safe plays. There is nothing stopping you from investing into high interest moves. There's platforms like Public, there's platforms everywhere that allow you to do this with as little as $10. Like, your money is not going to work harder than the markets. So the faster you realize that, and the faster you realize that the value of money is going down and real growth is coming out of assets, and if you just want to survive, you've got to start putting some of that cash into that and playing that game, because the rate of the dollar right now and the rate of what you're capable of earning is just diminishing. And if you want to stay
day over day,
if you want to stay in the game and you want to continue to go at rates higher than inflation, you're gonna have to start playing the game that everyone's screaming at you to play, but you don't feel you're at that level. That's your own limiting belief that has you feeling that.
Of course.
I saw a stat the other day that was crazy. I'm probably going to butcher the exacts of it, but the average American in a lower socioeconomic base spends $407 a year on lottery tickets. That same base says that they can't find $450 in a jam.
Yeah.
When shit hits the fan and a random cost comes up for themselves, they can't find that money to cover that situation. The money's there. You're just choosing to deploy it in the wrong places.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a mindset shift for I think everybody to go on, and a change in attitude towards the world. The world is not out to get you. Like it's on you to decide that you want to make a shift and make better decisions around your money or around your health or around whatever. Because we live in a place of abundance, and it's literally up to you to play the game.
Absolutely. And it's like there you should have more conviction in these institutions and these financial models now more than ever. Like the irony is just draw the parallel line between narrative here. So while people are telling you that the markets, especially in crypto, are reflective of a quote unquote crash, you have the SEC being as lenient as they've ever been. You have a presidency and a cabinet now that is incredibly pro crypto, moving to create a United States Reserve with XRP, with ADA, which is known as Cardano on the markets, Solana, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. So, like, as these narratives are establishing themselves, this isn't the time for you to be like, oh, is this thing going to work out? You know what I mean? Bank of America has announced that they're going to use a stable coin for a dollar peg that they're going to build off of the Solana
Stripe's
network.
building a stable
All these
coin.
other basis of conversations that are occurring. Why be fearful? Be opportunistic.
Yeah, and Stripe's doing a stable coin.
Yeah, Stripe is doing a stablecoin. Shopify years ago implemented Solana Pay, but now they've rolled it out on a full basis where you can now use crypto. And the major news of the space is that Apple is developing a crypto wallet for Apple Pay.
Wow.
So Apple is developing an NFC-based crypto wallet that you can deposit whatever crypto it is. I'm sure it's not whatever. I'm sure it's going to be a limited amount of like the top L1 main blockchains. And it'll do an automatic conversion for you at a point of purchase. Like, we are entering unprecedented times, and we're in a different era of adaptation and institutional implementation. So it's like, recognize these factors, and it goes back to your point of you saying, always educate yourself on the other side of the fence, for the other side of the narrative. Don't just look and search out for the negative sentiment in any aspect in life, you know? Like, you and I could be having a conversation as business partners, right? And you could be telling me, like, Sino, we got to work through this and see where it goes. And I could allow the insecurity of myself to look at that as a reflection of, wait a second, is he questioning our dynamic? Is he questioning like our brotherhood and our business dynamic? Like, is he saying like, let's work this out and see where it goes? Like, wait a second, like, you don't want to be partners anymore? Or do I look at it from the optimistic lens of like, no, let's work through this and see where it goes till we get to those tens of millions of dollars together? Like, it's all perspective of how you interpret things. You know what I mean? Like, my partner can walk out of the house and be like, I'll be back in a few. And I could be like, okay, like, where is she going? What is she doing? Like, does she need space from me?
Yeah.
Is it this or this and that? Or is the poor girl stepping outside to run some errands for a little bit? You know what I mean? It's like, it's all perspective.
100%.
And if you take it down to a base level of reality and simplify it, so it's not in the institution of finance and it's not in the institution of this, and you just always realize that it is based upon your interpretation, just train yourself and expand the plasticity of your mind to interpret things through an optimistic and opportunistic outlook. And that's my final note on that.
I love it, and that's going to lead into something that happened to me this week. It's a little bit more lighthearted, to be honest, than
Good, we
than
need
the
it.
other stuff. I was in the sauna. Actually, you know what?
This guy loves the sauna.
I'll go the full story. So I go to this sauna place. It's called Vabali in Hamburg. Incredible, right? But if I look at my 10-year-ago self, and if my 10-year-ago self was looking through the lens of my life today as a 30-something-year-old man in a sauna with 45 other people, with a man in a skirt putting water onto stones whilst handing out pots of honey and salt to rub into your skin whilst you exfoliate your skin naked in front of 41 to 50 other people. He would be relatively absurd. He would want a beer in my hand, and he would want me on the way to a club to enjoy my life.
Yeah.
But that's what age does to you. So
Yes.
I was at this place, and we were going around a bunch of different saunas, and we walked into one sauna, and there was 4 friends in there, and they were talking about life, and I just was like trying to distract myself from the pain and anguish of being in an incredibly hot sauna. And I was like listening quite deeply to the conversation and the language that they were using. And I just was so shocked at how negative it was. And I left that sauna and I went straight to my phone and I started to like download a bunch of notes. And one of the things that I landed on was, as a human being, you underestimate the importance of language. And what happens when you speak is it actually comes from your chest and from your stomach. And you begin the process of articulating your thoughts physically through your body. And I was thinking a lot about this, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole and got to the point where you have two choices with your language. You can either produce stones or you can produce seeds. They're the only two options that you have. Stones make change harder. Seeds make growth easier. And every single word that comes out of your mouth, if you don't start treating that with fucking intention, you're going to wonder why you're 40 years old with a bunch of stones that you can't move. Your ability to shift your life and change how you are is hard. You know, you're in the habit of words like I can't, or it's too late, or these kinds of things. That's a stone you've just added. It's a stone. Whereas as opposed to when I, or things like that, that's a seed, you know? And you've got choices to make in your language. And I've been doing this for a while now, and I have noticed a complete shift in every aspect of my life by making a conscious decision to speak from my chest and to produce seeds.
Wow.
And that's my realization in a sauna with 41 other people.
No, I think I just lost myself in what the words you were saying, because I felt like it was a deliverance of a message of sorts. Because, you know, I like to believe that, you know, we started on this endeavor together with this podcast because a lot of people in our lives around us have told us that we have a skill for oration, for the words that we use, the conversation topics that we like to touch on, and above all, more than anything at the top of that, our dynamic, right? Yeah. Like, I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, I love you guys together. Like, he's so interesting. He has so many experiences and insights. You already know the respect that I have for you and the love that I have for you, and the manner in which you have conducted yourself, your business, the way you carry yourself as a person, the measure of your heart. You are that long lost brother for me in a lot of ways, right? Likewise. And it's like, I was reflecting on this last night actually, and thinking about, I'm coming up on an anniversary for myself of being sober in a lot of ways, right? And I was thinking about how incredibly patient you were with me during that period when I was going through some shit. And I would reach out to you daily and I would tell you, like, brother, like, I just don't have it right now. Like, I can't bring myself together right now. I can't pick myself up. Like, and the only thing that you reiterated through that time was love, belief, and patience. And it's something that I'm so incredibly grateful for because of how our dynamic has prospered. And look at all the things that we have touched with the little Midas touch of a finger, the businesses that we have been able to revitalize, the businesses that we have been able to scale together beyond our own comprehension and belief, of us as a tandem coming into a dynamic, reinvigorating the books, establishing the infrastructure, establishing workflow and work orders, systems and processes, and outpacing our own expectations and projections of revenue, and being very proud of the fact that we did that in 2.5 to 3 months instead of a year to a year and a half, right? And in that moment of vulnerability and me being at the lowest of lows, you planted seeds, and you didn't cast any stones to say, fuck this guy. Like, he's not on stable ground right now. I got to move on to something else. I got to move on to the next best thing. And you helped nurture me along as a true friend, as a true brother. And on the scale of expressing this to everybody who listens, and for this to live in the eons of the internet forever, I just want you to understand the depths of my gratitude for you and how much I truly cherish our dynamic and our bond, because you reinvigorated my spirit in so many ways, and you inspire me on the day to day with the type of person that you are, how you move, your brain, your prowess, your creativity, bro, your expression for creative, your dyslexic copyright ability that is unfucking precedented, that's ridiculous and just shuts shit down, and who you are, bro, and the beliefs that you stand on. I'm very grateful, and it correlates back to what you're saying, because it's all a matter of what path you are willing to take. And very much in that moment, a lot of people would have been like, you know, I don't have the time to wait around for this guy. Like, I don't have the time. I got life. I got bills. I got things to get to. I got shit to do, yada, 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 whatever it might be. But you were patient with me. You allowed me to find myself and my ground again. You have always been supportive. When I've hit you up and told you, like, brother, like, yeah, I'm on a shaky train of thought right now, you literally always tell me, forget everything on the agenda. You tell me exactly where you're going to be and when you need me there, and I will hop on a flight tomorrow, you know? And it's those foundations and those dynamics of relationships that are rare to find in the world that you have to search and you have to hold on to. And that is what has led to this karmic prosperity that we are now experiencing, because you planted those seeds. So I don't know where I went with this, but I felt the measure of just having to tell you, because I am abundantly grateful for you forever and always. And outside of how I'm going to close it and sneak it in to tell you in 20, 30 minutes from now that you're the best co-host in the world, it's truly a place coming from a place of immense gratitude, brother. And I say it from a place of vulnerability, that I just thank you for who you are. And I got lost in what you were saying there, because that's what I took away from it. You have such a pure heart that you think that your stones that you may cast ever are like wrapped in roses. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's always in a constructive and loving manner of how you deliver it. And it's always for the betterment of a person. So I'm grateful for you, brother. That's just all I want you to know.